A warning to listeners, this episode contains graphic depictions of violence. Chris Lee was going to be out of the military soon. He was just days away from being honorably discharged. While the cloud of suspicion for Erin Corwin's disappearance hung over him, no charges had been filed against him. The Lees had planned their move back to Alaska, where Chris was from, but before they left,
they won't have a home because they're out of their barracks.
That's White Rock Horse Rescue owner Isabel Megley. Chris and Isabel had spent a lot of time together at the ranch, so they had become friends at this point. When Chris was in a jam, he asked Isabel if his family could stay at the ranch while they planned their move to Alaska.
We made this agreement. I said, well, you can stay at the bunkhouse until you leave, 7 days. How innocent was that? But that's not how it turned out.
Once Erin Corwin went missing, the police had started to suspect that Chris might be connected. But they still hadn't found her, and all the evidence against Chris was circumstantial or hearsay. They needed something firm.
The police were here, the detectives were here. He had his U-Haul here, and they wanted to go through his U-Haul. They had him handcuffed to the chairs over at the house. While they did this, they checked my house. They did not think I was involved, but my vehicles were involved because Chris Lee had used them.
The police didn't find a literal or figurative smoking gun in Chris's belongings, but they knew a lot about him, that he had been having an affair with Erin, an affair that continued in secret even after they were exposed. Before Erin disappeared, she'd been texting her friend Jessica, or as she called her, Jessie, about her relationship with Chris. But there was one message that caught the eye of the police, a text that gave them a clue on where they'd find Erin. This is NCIS agent Sean Nash, who saw the text.
This text message referred to a trip that Erin and Christopher Lee had made the day before she went missing.
All Chris told Erin was that this trip was going to take a couple of hours, and Erin thought this meant she was in for some big romantic gesture.
Erin had texted Jessica, "Laugh out loud, I seriously don't know why he would drag to a very special place to be a dumb surprise." Jessica had texted back to Erin some emojis with a ring and a diamond and then kiss symbols. I would assume that would be an engagement ring.
The detectives knew the trip would likely have been out to the Mojave Desert surrounding Joshua Tree, but they didn't know which specific part. The search and rescue teams were beginning to look for Erin, and learning where she could have gone with Chris could be the key to finding her. I'm CBS News correspondent Natalie Morales. This is 48 Hours NCIS, Episode 4, The Perfect Mine. Erin's car was found on July 1st, 2014, a few days after she went missing. The car was parked just a few miles outside the 29 Palms military base, with nothing missing or really any sign of disturbance. There was, however, another pair of tire tracks.
When San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department located Erin Corwin's car, the tire impressions surrounding the car did not match Erin's car.
This is NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr., who worked with the Sheriff's Department and local detectives on Erin Corwin's case. Special Agent Randolph says that it looked like Erin drove out to this spot to meet up with someone in a second car, then went out to the desert.
It seemed that someone drove out to that location and she got out of the car, got into this other vehicle, and went somewhere else, with those tracks ending at the black asphalt road out there.
Investigators believed that the tracks were left by a Jeep, and it just so happens Chris Lee drove a Jeep. This was one of the reasons that the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department initially brought him in for questioning 3 days after Erin's disappearance. You already heard some of what he said: his issues with memory loss, challenges adjusting to life after deployment, and how he met Erin. In video of the interrogation, Chris sat down under the dim hum of fluorescent lights in a t-shirt, shorts, and flip-flops. The detective sat across from him at a small table and asked about his plans for the future.
I think we're going to live with her brother because we got our 2 horses that we're shipping up there. And then I'm going to use my GI Bill to try and get a chemical engineering degree.
Chris told the detective that in the coming weeks, his family would be driving cross-country to Alaska, where he grew up, to start a new life.
Yeah, it's scary. But I'm ready for a change. And my wife, she's definitely ready to get out of here.
This interview was a very important opportunity for the detectives on Erin's case. Chris wasn't named a suspect at this point. He was invited in to answer a few simple questions about Erin. The detectives had an opportunity to talk to Chris without a lawyer and to get his story on the record. They also could use information to their advantage. Chris did not know what the detectives knew: that he'd been having an affair with Erin, her pregnancy, and the possible proposal, and that the two had planned a mysterious trip out to the Mojave Desert just before Erin vanished. Then they started to talk more about Chris and Erin's relationship. Chris admitted that he and Erin became an emotional support system for each other, and that the relationship turned physical. He also talked about his wife, Nicole, when she found out about the affair and the effect it had on their marriage.
And during the time that you were texting Erin, how was your relationship with Nicole?
It was under a lot of duress, a lot of strain. She kept trying to talk about things, and I just kept shutting her out.
Our relationship was under a lot of strain, Chris said. She kept trying to talk about things, and I just kept shutting her out. He called Erin his make-believe wife. But while recounting their affair, Chris also seemed to downplay it. They only kissed a few times, Chris said. That's where things stopped, according to him. That was a reckoning point. He broke things off with Erin after they got caught.
And then that was the end of it.
Okay, and
that was kind of like my reckoning point where I realized, I was messed up and I needed to ask for help.
Now the detectives tried to get more details. They wanted to get Chris to describe what he was doing in the days leading up to Erin's disappearance. Chris did not know that the investigators had found Erin's car and that they believed he might have been out in the desert with her. The detective asked Chris, when was the last time he saw Erin?
Okay. And then you saw her Wednesday of last week?
I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I just know it was because her and John.
Wednesday. That was 3 days before Erin went missing. But then Chris second-guessed himself. I'm not 100% sure, Chris said. She and John had come out of the house, but I would usually try to avoid them. When detectives asked for more specifics, Chris's memory got hazy once again.
So would you see their cars there on the weekend?
Sometimes. I really don't keep track of other things. And so like I said, unless she fixes something wrong or different, I don't really remember.
Sometimes I don't keep track of things. I don't really remember, he said. Chris referenced memory problems several times throughout the interview, sometimes blaming shell shock or PTSD. Then the detective started asking Chris about the desert. While they talked, volunteers were searching the desert for any evidence of Erin. So the detective wanted Chris to piece together his whereabouts. Where did he go around the time Erin went missing? Maybe if he told them about his trips out to the desert,
he'd give up a piece of information that might help them find Erin. The detective asked about Saturday, June 28th, the day Erin went missing.
Okay. I went to bed at midnight. What time did you wake up Saturday?
6, about.
Okay.
Because I was going to go coyote hunting that morning. Actually, I went coyote hunting that morning.
Chris said he woke up that morning and went coyote hunting alone. And then he guided the police along the route he took.
So I went by myself, and then I went down Adobe, took a left on 62 to a hole.
Chris's story had morphed and changed several times over the hours he spent in that interrogation room, but it was couched in hazy recollections and other memory problems, Chris said.
Then Chris's story took a wild turn. It's at this moment, as he described wandering around the desert coyote hunting, that Chris said he heard gunfire.
And then I got kind of lost, and at one point in time, I'm not sure the time of the day, I didn't check, but I'm not sure if the individual shot at me or if he was just like recreational shooting, but there was an individual.
Chris said that he heard 4 booms, claiming that he saw someone out there with a handgun.
I turned, and he went like this, it was boom, 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 boom. And I heard 4 shots as I was coming back down the bridge line.
I got out of there as fast as I could, Chris said. He said he couldn't tell if they were intentionally shooting at him or not. While Chris told this story, he gave detailed descriptions of where he went. Chris talked the detective through his hiking trails that carved through the mountains and dunes in the desert. He even marked up a map that the interrogators brought in to show them where he went.
Just put like an X where your house is at. Okay. And then so you go out that way to the 62 to Gold Crown. Did you make any other stops prior?
Whether he knew it or not, Chris gave investigators tons of details to work with, evidence that could help the search and rescue efforts for Erin that were continuing in the desert. Chris could be telling the police which parts of the vast desert to focus on.
The Mojave Desert stretched on for thousands of miles, and dotted through it were the landmarks of a literal golden age, the hundreds of abandoned mine shafts that filled the horizon. The desert is at the edge of 2 plates of the Earth's crust. That collision meant that this land was rich with minerals, ore for iron and steel, but most importantly, gold. So during the gold rush of the mid-1800s, people started coming from around the world to scour this land for wealth. More kept coming and making money through World Wars I and II before the resources started to dry up. The legacy of that time were the abandoned shacks, mills, railways, and mine shafts carved out of the earth that dot this sandy landscape. This is where the investigators were looking for Erin Corwin. She'd been missing long enough that the teams had to prepare themselves for the possibility they were looking for her body. The first aerial searches via helicopter identified over 100 abandoned mine shafts that were big enough to hide a corpse. The task ahead of the search and rescue teams would be daunting. So they enlisted the help of an expert, a local man by the name of Doug Billings.
Doug Billings, who we call the Mine Whisperer.
Experts like Doug Billings.
He's also been called the Cave Whisperer. He knows all about every single mine that is out in the Mojave Desert.
By day, Doug Billings is a soft-spoken owner of his family's hardware store. In his free time, though, he was an experienced and savvy cave diver. The 48 Hours team went out with Doug to the desert, where he showed them the land that he knew like the back of his hand.
As I stand here right now, I'm looking at a beautiful turquoise rock, and I'm looking at another white crystal rock, and I'm looking at the skyline and these black iron mountains, and thinking about, prospectors who 100 years ago were with a pick and shovel trying to make a living out here. There's nature, there's history, there's wildlife out here you see. It is beautiful, it's God's country.
Doug doesn't like to call himself an expert, but his connection to this terrain runs deep. His grandparents had a homestead here. As he grew up, Doug started exploring the caves, dotting the very stretch of land where Erin Corwin went missing. Many of the mine shafts that the search and rescue teams were looking at, Doug had already been in.
And spent a decade or more going through every single one of them, reading journals about them, mapping them, taking inventories of what you could find in them.
When Erin went missing, the search and rescue teams came to Doug to get his advice on where to start looking, and he ended up joining them. The teams went out into the desert in red hats and yellow jackets and traveled in small groups of 2 or 3. Temperatures would swell above 100 degrees in the sun, so their days had to start before dawn. At first, the search was being largely done by volunteers who had to rig safety equipment, lights, and cameras just to look inside some of these mine shafts. Doug and the team assigned numbers to every mine they could find, and they color coordinated which ones had been searched and which ones hadn't.
Well, the goal was to basically check every mine until we either cleared them or found her. And there was a lot of jumping around at the beginning. I mean, you just had evidence and you had to decide of the evidence what was worthy and what's not.
All the while, the detectives interviewing Chris Lee were relaying information to the search teams. Those stories that Chris Lee told about the desert were coming in handy.
You had a story of the suspect saying he drove up a canyon over here, or some ranger saw something funny in this mine over here. So we were bopping all around.
But as days turned to weeks without finding Erin or her body, Doug and the rest of the team had to go back to the drawing board. Which parts of the desert could Erin be in? The answer might be found in Chris Lee's interrogation, the interview you heard in the beginning of the episode. The detectives spent hours in that interrogation room asking Chris questions and poring over evidence. They had already gone through Chris's phone and computer, where they found something strange.
One other thing I wanted to ask you about, when we do analysis on your computers and your phones and all that stuff, are we going to see anything about murder or anything like that?
Probably.
Chris admitted to something. He said that he had been doing research on the best ways to get rid of a dead body. Chris chalked it up to harmless research he did after an offhand conversation with a friend.
I was having a conversation with one of the guys in the duty that it came up randomly, random marine talk about the best way to dispose of the body.
As Chris talked to the police, a detective asked more about his phone. Remember, the search and rescue team was trying to use cell phone data to find out where Chris may have traveled.
And when you took off Saturday, did you have your phone with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, but I put it in airplane mode.
Chris said he did have his phone with him, but it was on airplane mode to save the battery. Then the detective asked about Erin. Have you and Erin ever met in this area?
Have you and Erin ever met in this dirt area?
No.
Does she know about this area?
Maybe. I mean, if she drives down that way, you can see them. They're just roads.
It was in this moment that the cat and mouse game between Chris and the detectives in the room changed. Things became more confrontational.
And that's why I'm asking about her car, okay? Because we found her car.
How did you?
Yeah, it was parked in that dirt.
Okay.
Okay, so any reason why she would have been parked in that dirt?
No, not that I can think of. Maybe she was meeting up with somebody. But
The detective pressed Chris on his story.
All right, Chris. Here's the deal, man. We've been doing this a long time, okay? We found our vehicle, okay? We found your tire tracks. We know that you were going to meet her on Saturday. We know that. We know that you were going to go take her for a long drive and it was going to be a surprise. We know those things, okay? And we also know that you were one of the last people to see her alive.
The detective pulled his chair close to Chris, sitting just inches away from him, while Chris leaned back against the wall, stone-faced.
Have you ever been out with her up in the mountains or in this area?
No, I haven't.
Do you know if she's been in this area?
I don't.
But the police kept the pressure on.
Only problem is there's so many different versions of your story that nobody can believe you, honestly.
Then the police confronted Chris over Erin's pregnancy.
I don't know what might have been going through your head when you found out she was pregnant, but I can only imagine if it were me, I'd have a hell of a lot to think about. There'd be a lot of emotions. There'd be a lot of stuff built up inside. And I'm telling you, man to man, any man facing that type of situation has a lot to worry about.
At every question he faced, Chris denied any wrongdoing. At this point, it might have felt like they had reached an impasse. But finally, during a long silence several hours in, Chris revealed a small sliver of critical information.
I didn't see her on Saturday. I just saw her vehicle. I was out that way when I was picking up more tires for a fire. And I drove past it to see if she was in there, but she wasn't.
He told detectives that he did see Erin's car the day she went missing. I drove past it to see if she was in there, but she wasn't, Chris said.
I didn't actually ever see her on Saturday. I was worried that if I told you guys I saw her car because of my previous relationship with her, you would automatically assume I did something.
I was worried that if I told you guys I saw her car, you would automatically assume I did something. The interrogators tried to give Chris opportunities to confess.
I'm not here to play games with you, but I can tell you, something happened out there. Something definitely happened. It's only a matter of, was it planned? Was it a cold-blooded killing? Or did something just happen? That's all it is.
But Chris stuck to his story. And without Erin's body, the police had nothing directly linking Chris to her disappearance. So they were forced to let Chris Lee go with a warning.
We're going to find Erin. Right now, the Marine Corps base is helping us. They're gathering as many soldiers as they possibly can to go out and start checking all these areas. We're going to find her.
After his interrogation, Chris left the police department and went to Isabel Megley's White Rock Horse Ranch. His family had been living there as his military service ended, and they prepared to move to Alaska. It was an awkward arrangement. Chris and his wife and daughter all living in a spare room at the ranch. The news about Chris and Erin's affair and his possible involvement in Erin's disappearance put the ranch's owner, Isabel Megley, in an uncomfortable position.
Chris never reacted to anything. From the time she went missing, he never uttered a word to me. He never talked to me. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen.
In the days after Erin's disappearance, Isabel was becoming increasingly suspicious of Chris, and she was thinking back to the odd things Chris would do when he was around. One time, Isabel remembered Chris taking a cattle prod and shocking people for fun. He also made a garrote. It's a small handheld weapon made up of a nylon cord stretched tight between two small plastic handles. The finished product looked sort of like a pair of nunchucks. At the horse ranch, Chris even showed some local kids how to use it.
He was very proud of it. So we would put it on their necks and show them how to eliminate them. He found great pleasure in showing them.
Chris was no stranger to weapons. He'd grown up hunting. He served in Afghanistan. And back in the States, friends recalled how he liked playing with explosives and shooting target practice with his guns. But something else stuck with Isabel. Something Chris told her after returning from the desert about a week before Erin disappeared.
He said to me in a very exciting tone, "I found the perfect mine." He said, "No one will ever find it."
The mine was totally isolated. He had to go off-roading for 2 hours just to find it.
And I looked at the pictures that he showed me, but I couldn't tell a mine at that time. It was just rocks to me, and I wasn't interested, to tell you the truth. And then when she went missing, I told the detectives.
This was potentially a big lead. The pictures of this mine that Chris Lee took could be the key to finding Erin. Cave expert Doug Billings and the rest of the team were weeks into their search and still scouring the desert for Erin.
So I was in the sheriff's office going over some of the evidence, trying to narrow down the search. And we were talking about, is Erin really in a mine shaft? And he walks up to me and he pokes me on my chest a couple times, says, "She's in a mine shaft." And he points at me and goes, "And you're gonna find her." And I said, "Okay, let's do it."
Over the course of the search, Doug dropped down 30 mines himself, but the entire search effort covered more than 100 mines in total. The teams were fighting 115-degree days, dehydration.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other hazards we were encountering right from the day one, in addition to the heat, was probably 1 out of every 3 mines we went into had a rattlesnake in it. A few of them had giant black widow nests blocking them, and you had rock falls, and we had even one incident where we had a big colony of Africanized bees basically infest our camp. And the heat was just terrible, it was just so hot, and it slows you down.
Eventually, Doug was brought into the crime lab to see the pictures that Chris Lee took during his trip out to the mines, the pictures that Isabel Megley had mentioned. Doug saw them and recognized the area.
She has to be in that canyon. And as I started making a list of everything there, I really had a lot of areas where I said, I'm not sure everything in there was searched. And so I went back and redrew up a new map and really highlighted the areas that got missed.
The mine shaft itself is small and nondescript, tucked between the desert and a small mountain range. While the search and rescue teams made their way toward this spot, NCIS investigators and local detectives were trying to keep an eye on Chris Lee. He no longer had anything tying him to the 29 Palms military base, and because they couldn't charge him with the crime, Chris was a flight risk. Things changed when Isabel Megley mentioned something else in passing to the detectives. She said that Chris borrowed Megley's car to run an errand, and when he returned, she noticed something in the back, this big metal contraption that she couldn't really make sense of.
I said, "What is that thing in my car?" "It's a potato launcher." I said, "What's a potato launcher?" And out of the blue comes the detective. He came out and he said, "What did you say?" And so we repeated it, that it was in my car. I don't know what it is.
I have no idea why anyone would have a potato gun.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. again.
Potato gun is a high-powered destructive device that basically launches potatoes or projectiles of that type.
Here's where a small part of California law became very important to this story, because in California, that potato gun is classified as a destructive device. That meant owning one was illegal. Here's Isabel Megley again.
He said, "That's a felony. We will get him right away."
And so Chris Lee was arrested, not because of Erin's disappearance, but instead because he was in possession of a destructive device, a potato gun. It's a relatively minor charge in the scheme of things, But the important thing is that even if Chris made bail, he'd have to stay in the state of California as a condition of his bond. It's a plan that investigators concocted to keep tabs on Chris as they kept up the search for Erin. And as each day passed, the pressure on those investigators was building.
This is a person. This isn't a case.
NCIS Special Agent Clifton Randolph Jr. again.
You put that photograph of Erin in your case, and that humanizes the person that you're looking for. You can't forget that this person has a family, has a husband, has a mother, has a brother, a sister, a friend. They wanted to know where Erin was, and you can't forget that.
Erin's case only captured local headlines at first. But on August 1st, People magazine published a 6-page cover story headlined Pregnant and Missing, Mystery of the Marine's Wife.
The front page featured a picture of Erin and John. John in his blue Marine uniform and Erin in a matching gown, pasted next to a picture of Chris Lee in his cowboy hat. These faces were now plastered across magazines from coast to coast. The Corwin investigation had officially captured the national spotlight, so the pressure on investigators was going to be higher than ever. Around this time, NCIS Special Agent Randolph stepped onto an airplane, only to see row after row of passengers reading that very People magazine story.
You see a sea of it walking down that aisle. And I remembered, I think weeks after that, I kept seeing that image in my head there, and like constantly reminding me, hey, you have a job to do.
With the national spotlight on Erin, the search for her continued back in the desert. But 6 weeks into the search, the sheriff's department scaled back their efforts, saying there was too much ground to cover and not enough manpower. Doug Billings was helping the remaining search and rescue teams pick up the slack. They were still focused on finding that mine that Chris Lee visited before Erin disappeared. Doug had been leading searches at spots that fit that description. They were wrapping up a search on the evening of Saturday, August 16th, when a firefighter took one last look deep down one of the mine shafts, a 10 by 10 gap in the rocks that looked down into a dark chasm. Flashlights didn't reveal much, but something stood out to the team as they approached it.
The smell of gasoline and the smell of decomposition.
This is reporter Beth Ford Roth again. She says the firefighters were on high alert. Could this finally be it, they wondered? Could this be Erin's resting place? The mines were dangerous. Some didn't have enough oxygen for a human being to survive.
So what the searchers were doing, they were taking buckets, putting a camera inside the bucket, and then lowering the bucket down the mines.
Beth Ford Roth has seen the terrifying video taken during this search. She said you can hear the bucket scraping against rock as it slid down into darkness.
All of a sudden you start to see color. And you see a little flash of pink. And you see, what looks like denim. And they realized that it was a body.
The firefighters then rappelled down into the dark cavern. There, laying on a ledge 140 feet beneath the earth, was Erin's body, identified by her tattered pink shirt and denim shorts.
Then they looked around, because other things had been dumped down the mine shaft as well.
Basically, the person who killed Erin used it as sort of a dumping ground for every possible piece of evidence that would tie him to Erin.
There was a propane tank, a makeshift torch, a bottle of Sprite, some old tires, and a Marine Corps t-shirt. But when they were able to finally pull Erin's body out of the hole, they found something else, something wrapped around her neck, a nylon cord stretched between two pieces of rebar. A handmade garrote. Next time on 48 Hours NCIS, while Erin's family mourns her death, the manhunt for Chris Lee begins. From CBS News and CBS Studios, this is 48 Hours NCIS. Original reporting by 48 Hours producer Paul LaRosa. Anthony Batson is the senior producer for 48 Hours. Jamie Benson is the senior producer for Paramount Audio. Special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard, CBS Studios senior vice president Rob Luchow, and Paramount Audio vice president Megan Marcus. Our podcast was written and produced by Jay Venables, Isabel Kirby McGowan, Kara Schillen, Max Johnston, Megan Nadolski, and Ian Enright. Additional reporting and recording by Isabel Kirby McGowan, Jay Venables, and Megan Nadolski. Our executive producers are Megan Nadolski and Ian Enright. Theme and music by Epidemic Sound. Original music from Goat Rodeo with additional music from Paramount. Final mix by Rebecca Seidel. Ian Enright is our fact checker. Our production manager is Megan Nadolski. I'm Natalie Morales. If you're enjoying this show, be sure to give it a rating and review. It helps more people find it and hear our reporting. If you liked 48 Hours NCIS, check out the rest of our 48 Hours podcasts by searching 48 Hours on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.